portrait, and on painting the portrait, we'll talk about the anatomy of the neck and the head. So I have your reference in the scene. That's very helpful to see that. And I have these color swatches that I'm going to use eventually. I drop a tone that's close to the tone. I drop from your reference image too if you want. But I'll try to use one that I think is similar. Let's try that. This one. And I will start the sketch. And we'll talk about what it looks like if it's based on Andrew Loomis style sketching. So, of course, it will be your own sketches, but based on that technique. So, a spherical shape for the head. That would be the first place to start. And the spherical shape is usually the top of the head to like the bottom of the cheekbones. That's where you get the round area. And then you extend the shape down towards the chin like this. And you keep it sketchy. So sketching is when you do multiple lines together. So this would be sketching. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Multiple lines equal a sketch. So definitely keep it a sketch to start with. Let's see where the center of the face is on the model. And the person is slightly angled, tilting their head to one side. So it's like this. And then angle like this. That's the center of the face. There's a bit more volume on the left-hand side because the head is also slightly rotated. In the Andrew Loomis books, let's take a look at how Andrew Loomis divided up the face. So typically, you would start with a sphere, like we just did. And in Andrew Loomis's case, he would get the center of the face and the top of the eyebrows. It helps you lock down an angle. When you're doing animated characters, 3D animation, depending on the style, like if you did Disney style or Richard Williams style, or there's various styles of marking off the landmarks. But for animation, they typically would use the bottom of the eyes for the reference and not the eyebrows. So we'll go with the eyebrows first. But typically, it would be halfway from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. So just mark off that space. This would be the bottom of the eyes, so that halfway point. So right here, bottom of the eyes. And eyebrows is just right above. You can see the space. Take 1/5 of that space. So right about there, that's the eyebrow. So Andrew Loomis would focus on the eyebrow line first, whereas Disney would focus on the bottom of the eyes first. You'll notice in Andrew Loomis, he also does something like this, where he gets the side of the corner of the skull down to the cheekbone, something like that. And then there's also the center of the eye. So if you divide that space in half, so right about here, the center of the eyes. Eventually he will get to that. And there's the hairline, which is right about here. So we got eyebrows, hairline, bottom of the nose. So looking on the reference, where do you think the bottom of the nose should be? Right about here. And the center of the mouth, center line of the mouth. That's usually what I go with. Something like that. And then we'll look for the neck. Where does the neck attach? Notice things that align, like the center of the eye lines up with the side of the neck. So if you brought that line all the way down, it would be the neck. This muscle here is the sternocleidomastoides, the neck muscle. We'll draw this transparently at first, and then we'll add the cloth on top. That's kind of what it would be like. So notice the angle of the shoulders. This shoulder is higher, so it's tilted like this, whereas the head is tilted down. So this is going to come down like this. This is going to be higher. So that means they're leaning to one side in the pose. Get a bit of a cross. Okay, let's look back at Andrew Loomis for a second. And we'll name all these landmarks. Similar to the way that Andrew Loomis names them. Okay, so here there's the divisions, but it's not telling you the exact name. So if we go over to the other book, and they gave you guys these books, and we'll zoom in to the top left-hand side. So there's the hairline, the brow line. This is the bottom of the eyes, which he didn't say that that was the bottom of the eye, but that is the bottom of the eyes. So Disney would focus mostly on that. And then the cheekbones, he's also marked the cheekbones. And then the bottom of the nose, where it meets the face. And then he's drawing he says the lips, and it says 1/3 down from the nose. That's how he's seeing that. And then the chin is a bit longer, but everyone's proportions are slightly different. So for this model I'm drawing, this person I'm drawing, from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin, the center of the mouth is halfway. So it's a little bit different than Andrew Loomis's measurement. And let's get the cheekbones, because Andrew Loomis did get the cheekbones right here. Eyebrows. And remember, this is just a block-out sketch to start. Here's the collarbone. Notice something about the eye and the corner of the mouth. So the corner of the mouth and the eye line up almost vertically. This way. It's something that Andrew Loomis notes in his book. Eventually, I don't know if he marks it off, but many books would mark that off. So the center of the eye, it is lining up with the corner of the mouth. And that's a typical lineup, or typical alignment that he would use. So he has the top of the eyebrow and the top eyelid, whereas Disney would have the bottom of the eyelid. We'll look at Preston Blair book, and we'll look at the zygote model. So where on the skull, we'll go back to the skull here. So the eye socket itself, that is pretty much halfway. Top of the head, bottom of the eye socket, that is the halfway point. And that's what that would be referring to in like the Disney book or the Richard Williams book or Preston Blair. And that's how you would rest eyes. So Andrew Loomis does have that illustrated when he starts to do the facial expressions here. There's the alignments. Once you have that memorized, then you start to move it around. You can see how he treats the neck's muscle, like the sternocleidomastoideus, collarbone. So after studying the anatomy, then you would go into form, and this would be called planes, the planes of the face, which relates to 3D. I don't draw that every time when I'm drawing. I do draw it a lot of the times, so sometimes. So this helps you relate perspective to your drawing. And you see it as a cubic shape. So the corner of the eyebrow lines up with the corner of the cheek, typically. Then when you want to get creative, you can become creative with your characters by shifting those alignments around from a human style of creativity to a cartoon style of creativity. These are more realistic, but You get the idea. If you're interested in reading what he has to say about that, this is also more of the alignments we were talking about. He goes into musculature here, right here. He starts to talk about how the muscles move and the skin moves and everything. Remember, every artist talks about this in very different ways. So Disney, Richard Williams, Preston Blair, Andrew Loomis, they all have slightly different ways of measuring the head. I'm combining all of those books to this. So it won't relate exactly because it's a different figure, but I just want to check the alignments. So let's look. Let's see here. Typically, one measurement you have is the eyes would be one eye space apart and 5 eyes across from the left side to the right side. If you take the volume of the eye, you have 2 eyes, and the volume between the eyes and also on either side of the eyes, you would have 5 spaces. So then also the eye lines up with the mouth, depending on the person. The inner eye and eyebrow line up with the nostril, and your head overall creates kind of a V shape, depending on the person. The center of the face lines up with the center of the nose, center of the mouth, center of the chin, center of the hairline. Then when you start to rotate it like this, try to keep those alignments in order. So there's many, many ways to describe that. Okay. So I think my measurements overall are somewhat similar, but they don't have to be exactly the same. I'm going to turn the opacity down so it looks more like a sketch. Okay, so I have the center of the eye. Let's get these 2 points here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So then the top eyelid sits right here, like that, on top of the x-axis. So this represents the y-axis, and this represents x-axis, if you're thinking of 3D. And the muscle here, it is there, but you can't see it. That's the shape of the muscle that we were looking at earlier. And this person has a cloth on their head, so very good. So normally, once I get the measurements done, I'll start to add the sketches. An interesting way to think of the nose is like a bird flying, this shape, as well as the mouth. That gives you the bottom of the nose, the bottom of the center of the nose, and then the wings of the bird. And this person's face is a bit more cubic. The hair, define the hair a little bit more. So this is still part of the sketch. Okay, I'll make a new layer. Depending on if I'm going to draw or paint, I normally at this point would start to add tone, face tone. But I'll get a little bit more detail first, especially in the eyes. The eyebrow sits right against the eyelid there. The bottom of the nose, and the nostril. As you start with the center of the mouth first, a little bit of the cheekbone, a bit of the jaw. You turn the plastic down a bit, so it blends into the sketch. So two particular form shapes that we'll talk about is this muscle, which in the reference image, it actually, there's actually two pieces. So it goes to the collarbone like this. It's attached in two different ways like this. But what is the form of that? So if you think of it as a volume, it will be kind of like a cylindrical shape. That was one of the major shapes to think about. Let's talk about this collarbone. Its shape is like this. And pretty interesting thing about the sternocleidomastoideus muscle is it attaches to collarbone on one side, and it attaches to the sternum on the other. So sternum would be right about here. And that makes that divot in the center of the chest. Let's see what Andrew Linus says about that. That's where that will be. So overall, this shape, depending on how you define it, some people may define it like this. But I tend to focus mostly on the actual shape of the muscle. So that's a cylindrical form. And most muscle does this. Whatever shape it is at either end, there's a round volume, like a cylindrical volume in the middle that has more mass. This area at the bottom would be the tendon. It's a lot more dense. So let's look at the zygote. This muscle. So it's actually one part. It does have a rounded shape when you look at it from this angle. But when you look at the whole piece by rotating, you'll see it's actually a rectangular shape rather than a cylindrical shape. And it's connected to the collarbone and the sternum. It's the actual shape. And what does that look like on the reference image? It's here. It's right about here. And you can only see a very small piece of that right there. And you can see the rectangular shape of it. It's not really cylindrical, but artists tend to translate it cylindrically. They tend to translate it down to cylinders. Let's see, where did he do that? Oh, right here. He does see the split, but he is still treating it as one piece, but it's actually two. It's actually, sorry, he's treating it as two pieces, but it's actually one piece of the same muscle. Well, anyway, um, see, it looks like it's overlapping, one overlapping the other, but it's not. It just has two pieces. So it's one muscle, two pieces. Sternocleidomastoides. But it depends on how artists translate it. Typically, you would see that one dominant piece right down by the collarbone, where the collarbone meets the sternum. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that. Uh, we'll look at some of the other muscle as we go along. Okay, usually when I get to this point, I will do a tone pass on a separate layer. And at this point, I would probably change my brush. I think this is the one I was using. Yeah, let's try this one. I think I'll continue to use that one. I'll try that one. So this is called Kyle's Pink Box Soft Drag, but I'll use several of those. They're in the custom brush pack. I'll turn the opacity down, make a new layer, keep my sketch on. Oh, I was going to label this for you. So this is, let's go back here to the sketch. Top of head. This is the hairline. This is the eyebrows. And these are things that you would memorize over time. And the x-axis is bottom of the eyes. Then you have bottom of nose, center of mouth, and bottom of chin. There's quite a few other landmarks. So if you notice in Andrew Loomis's book, he doesn't specifically name those specific spots. He does have hair, brow, eye, nose, chin. Doesn't say center of mouth. I always use the center of mouth because that's what you would see in like the other books that we've talked about, Disney or Preston Blair. And each time he sketches this, at the very beginning, he's talking about how he thinks about it and how he draws this. Interesting that he has that nail pin in the center of the head because that would be the y-axis. Okay. Let's go back to the first tone. And I'm going to turn the opacity way down and the flow way down. Put one solid tone over top of the whole thing. I think it should go down a little bit. Including the cloth. This is not really about skin tone. This is about light and dark. What light do you see on the face? I'm going to start to build a color palette based on tone. The one thing I do is with the eraser, I will match the eraser to the brush when I'm painting. So go to the brush palette, brush settings, hit E for eraser, go to transfer, turn on transfer for the eraser, and also maybe try to use this chalk brush for the eraser so that it matches the style of brush I use. The chalk brush is also great to paint the whole entire image with. So we'll start to build a library of tones. This is one. That's going to be the darker tone. And you can eyedrop from your reference, or you can use your eye. And this helps you train your eye to see. I'll just look here and then choose a color. But I want a brighter tone. Let's try this one. B. Put that there. And we need dark, medium, light, at least 5 different tones. And if you want to see how close you are, you can open up your color picker, bring it over here, just look back and forth. That's pretty close. I chose that from over here. Let's choose another one. A little bit lighter. So that's the brightest highlight. Maybe a little bit more pink on it. And we'll double check it. I'll put that in the middle of those two. Okay, something like that. There's some other colors that you might not see, but there's always going to be some greens, and there'll always be some blues in the skin because of subsurface scattering on the skin. So that's something you'll always see. And I think I need one more midtone here, so I'll choose. There we go. You'll have your color palette. Or your color swatch. And then I drop from that. Okay, once we have this, we'll get the darker tone and go back to the darker tone. And look for the darker shadow areas. So that would be under the eyes for sure. I usually start with mid-tone and then go darker and then go lighter and then dark, light, so on. And painting. These shadows are green because of the cloth, but I'll use this color to start. Using Photoshop, the bracket keys are what you use for shrinking, enlarging the brush. Okay. And now we'll go to a lighter tone. See, look for the darker shadow area and then look for the lighter tones from highlights. So usually the highlights come from the oil on your skin, the water on your skin, and the light hitting oil and water on your skin. And it gives you this translucency that's called subsurface scattering. So you're not just seeing the surface of the skin, you're seeing slightly below the skin.
because of the way light bounces around inside the skin. So you'll get this light bouncing back. So I'll take, I think, this tone and use this for these areas. This is not the brightest tone. Not because it's not the mid-tone either. There are some tones in the middle that I'll go back to. And one thing that affects the way you see the artwork that you're creating is the background. In this case, the model has a darker background behind them. At some point, I'll have to make that dark background in order for this to look right. Go back to slightly darker tone. And this is the tone that's right here in this area. This is the deep shadow tone, and then the lower light tone, and now I've gone back just above the darker shadow tone. So it's a little bit lighter, but not as bright as the one I just put on. And this will be over the majority of the face, I think, this color. You have your artwork side by side with your reference. That will help you pick up more information from the reference. Okay, so here's the highlight, the lower highlight, and the darker shadow area and the mid shadow area. Let's go a little bit brighter, kind of in between those two. This one. And just put that between the highlight and the shadow area. I think that's kind of a yellow ochre color. So you're basically going back and forth. Highlights the shadow, and just you constantly repeat that over and over again. The highlights make these a little bit brighter. It almost blocks the color. So I haven't touched the eyes yet. I'll go to that right after this.
go a little bit brighter. Actually, we'll go to the eyes. The white eye of the eyes is not exactly pure white. It depends on everyone's eye. But one thing that's really bright in every single eye is the highlight, depending on the type of light, because the eye is very interesting, is like a mirror reflection of whatever your environment is. So if you got really close to the eye, you could literally see everything around a person. It's pretty interesting. It's a bit of a highlight right above the eye. Down. It's the top eyelid. Highlight on the top eyelid. Go a little bit brighter this time with the highlight. Actually, let's go with, because eye, the iris, acts like the iris of the cat, or the camera iris is very similar to the iris of the eye. And the way it opens and closes is pretty interesting. And because of all those small parts that overlap and interact, you get this very interesting color palette as the eye opens and closes. So I like to get that tone in there so it's a little bit brighter, but yet at the very bottom it's still dark. Something like that. And now let's get the highlight. So the highlight, remember, it is reflecting exactly what's in front of the person. So there's a lot of detail there. Yeah, and that highlight is also in the nose. In art, you don't want it to look exactly like your reference, otherwise it wouldn't be artistic. You do want it to look as close as possible while maintaining the uniqueness of your art ability. This particular brush I'm using feels like charcoal. It's pretty cool. I like it. Go back to this tone. you want to intensify the tone, you can double the layer. I think the hair first. Hair's darker. In the darkest areas, I'll go back over like the eyes, the iris, and the pupil. The eyes are quite a bit darker. So let's get the eyes. I'll get some of the green colors. Start with a mid-tone. Make a library of them here. Light, medium, dark. And we'll start with a mid-tone. I'll put it on a darker background soon because that way you will have the true color balance once you have the same background. Once you have all your painting done, so there's the sketch. We did the mid-tone, did the painting now. You can duplicate this layer. There's a few other colors you want to add, but and it just intensifies the tone. So it needs brighter highlights on the forehead and the cheeks. And it also needs, I need to brighten some of the tone in the gloss. So I'm going to use the O or Dodge and Burn tool. Like that. Also use it on the skin. Just be careful. It doesn't, don't use too much of it. Just need a tiny bit of a brighter highlight, which is this one. But I'll turn the opacity down on that. And also need to do the hair highlight. Just to color a bit and adjust. Right, this contrast. So now I'll enlarge it and fit the page. Get rid of the color palette. But I think you should paint a bit of a background behind that. So use some of these tones with this one. And turn the tone down. Opacity, flow. Because you'll notice in the background of the original, it's not exactly solid black. It's got a bit of the color of the cloth in the background. So it's hard to reference for a second. There's some pretty interesting filters you can use on this. Make sure to filter it. And I think it's under noise. I know, style. Dust and scratches. A bit too much. Oh, that's nice. When you get closer to things, you can see things. Oh, yeah, let's fix that. Just